eerste ervaring.
And now, the Beachcombers.
The County Fair Jamboree.
And new stars burn into the ancient skies over the murmurous, soft
A lot of fights.
Hawaiian sea.
Starting at 1:40 o'clock.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the world-renowned Mighty Wurlitzer Radio Hour.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Cass, welcoming you to the John Milton Williams Museum of Radio Broadcasting History, a world-class collection of microphones and artifacts from commercial radio's earliest beginnings. We're delighted to have with us in the museum library this afternoon Robert Conrad, an icon in Cleveland radio and a great name in American fine arts and classical music broadcasting for the past 50-plus years. Bob has also been the radio voice of the world-famous Cleveland Orchestra for more than half a century.
Well, coming up on half a century. I think it's 48 years right now.
Longer than
Milton Cross.
Or any of the other great ones.
That's right. James Fassett, Ben Grauer. Mm-hmm. In fact, when I was a teenager and growing up, I listened to the NBC Symphony on Saturday nights at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and Ben Grauer was the announcer. And Sunday afternoon on CBS, it was the New York Philharmonic with James Fassett. And I said, someday I would like to be an orchestra commentator. And
did you think of that even then?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, very much so. And by golly, I did it.
Yes, you did.
And not only with an orchestra, with one of the top orchestras in the world. It's great fun, and that's one of the things that I'm really happy that I had an opportunity to do and to continue to do. And I will not retire. They will carry me feet first out of the announce booth at Severance Hall with the microphone clutched in my cold, dead hand.
There you go. Well, I think that must be a treasured memory to be a part of the orchestra for all those years.
Oh, absolutely. Beginning with George Sell, through Lauren Mazel, Christoph von Dockmann, and now Franz Welser Most.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to ask you, Bob, about how it all started for you in radio, and tell us about yourself, where you're from, and how did it all begin?
I was born in Kankakee, Illinois, which is a town of about 25,000, just south of Chicago, about 60 miles. The first major stop on the Illinois Central Railroad going. So it's sort of halfway between Champaign-Urbana and Chicago. And my earliest recollection of interest in radio was that my mother and I listened to an exercise program on WGN at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I was 5 years old, and I know I was 5 because I remember where we were living at that time. And I asked my mother what it took to be a radio announcer. And she said, well, learn how to pronounce all the words in the dictionary, which I have yet to be able to do. Mm-hmm. But all the time I was growing up, I was fascinated with radio, and my ultimate goal was to be a radio announcer. And I made toy microphones out of toilet paper rolls, and I would write scripts to read into. I had a play radio station. Mm-hmm. And when I was 14, they built a radio station in Kankakee, WKAN, and I just went down and hung around until they said, here, carry this. And what I carried was the equipment for the sports broadcasts. And I would go out with the sportscaster to the basketball games, and I would engineer and keep score. And then they decided to give me a radio program on with 3 other kids on Saturday afternoon called High School Matinee. And I did that all through up until I graduated. On Sundays, they let me come in and do station breaks, run the board, and it was a real 4-year internship in broadcasting. When the summer I graduated from high school, I was the vacation replacement announcer, which meant that I got to do everything in the station when the regular announcers went on vacation. When the morning shift went on vacation, I did the morning programming. When the newscasters went on vacation, I called the police department and find out what was happening and get all the obituaries. We had a lot of obituaries on WKAN, and write the news and deliver it. One of the programs I got assigned to during this summer was a live country and western show. called Hayloft Jamboree with Harley Dahl, the Sun Valley Boys, and Sunbeam Marcia Jean Gokul. It was an audience participation program. They had a rather large studio, and they put chairs in, and the audience would come in, and we would do this show on 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. And on that program, I was known as Sagebrush Bob. I was 17 years old at the time, so that was pretty heady stuff. I have to tell you, the #1 live radio program in Kankakee, Illinois.
Friends, you've been listening to the County Fair Jamboree featuring Harley Dowell and the Sun Valley Boys, their Sunbeam Juanita Martin, with Art Benscoter doing the calling. The County Fair Jamboree is brought to you each evening at this time, 7 to 7:30, by the Kankakee Daily Journal, read by more than 70,000 people weekdays and Sundays. The County Fair Jamboree has been broadcast from the stage of the WKAN Radio Theater on the midway of the Kankakee County Fair. And this is Bob Conrad inviting you to join us again tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock for another County Fair Jamboree.
Now the nest like swinging on a gate, and back to your honey, go right left, take that, meet that belly and a pat on the head, she won't beat this.
We now return you to our downtown studios.
My roots were in country and western. At the same time, my idol was Dave Garroway, who was a disc jockey at that time. He was the first host of the Today Show on NBC television. He did a program on WMAQ, the NBC station in Chicago, called the 1160 Club. It was on at midnight. And I would keep the radio down low so my folks didn't know that I was listening to the radio. But he played really good music, Les Brown and Tommy Dorsey and Ella Fitzgerald and the other biggies of the day. And he liked to use, or he didn't like to, he did use big words like eleemosynary and esoteric and things like that. And I said, by golly, I've got to have a good vocabulary as he does. So I got a book called 90 Days to an Improved Vocabulary. And the deal was that you got a word and you tried to use it as many times as possible in a day. And sometimes it was a little difficult because how many times are you going to use the word eleemosynary in conversation with someone?
I don't even know what that means.
Well, it means generous, philanthropical. An eleemosynary organization is one that is charitable. Well, anyway, one day on Hayloft Jamboree, I used the word esoteric. And I don't know in what context. I got a postcard that said, I sure do like the music you play, but you use too big of words. So when I went to Northwestern, I had 4 years of broadcasting experience under my belt.
How did you happen to go to Northwestern? Why Northwestern?
Beryl Danforth. She's the one who pointed me to Northwestern and got me through the process. And it was absolutely the best place to go. You know, there are all sorts of people, through theater and radio, who went through Northwestern, and they're ready there to get you into the business, really.
And what was your major there?
Speech.
Speech.
You know, I was a broadcasting major. Also working part-time at WEAW, which was a commercial FM station in Evanston.
What kind of music did they play?
Classical music. It was in the evening. During the day, they did what was called at that time storecasting. But since the live shift was in the evening from 6 o'clock until I guess it was midnight. And that's when I could work because I was going to school during the day.
Were you focused on being an FM radio, or did you want to be a network announcer?
It just happened I could get a job at an FM station. Of course, in those days, FM was almost zilch because AM was still the big guy in town, and FM was only starting. And the audience, of course, was very small, and very few people had FM radios. But it was an opportunity to really work on a radio station. And when I was a junior, I had an opportunity to go down to WFMT and audition and get hired by WFMT. So I worked for FMT all the way through the rest of my college career until I went into the Army. And then when I came back from the Army, went back to work for WFMT for a couple of years.
And then what happened after Northwestern?
went into the Army. That was back in the days of draft. And
How well I remember.
yeah. But I had heard that there was a psychological warfare unit, reserve unit in Chicago. So when I was a senior, I went out and joined the unit because I felt, that I could determine when I went into the Army, there was no doubt that I would have to go in and serve. And maybe they could get me into a psychological warfare unit. Wouldn't end up in the infantry or something like that. So by the time I graduated and was due to go in the Army, I was a corporal. So I went in as a corporal, which is a pretty good position to have in boot camp.
I would say so.
Got out of KP. After I got out of the company clerk school, I did get assigned to the Psy-War Center in
Fort Bragg?
Yes, Fort Bragg.
Were you doing radio then?
Not at that point I wasn't, because there wasn't any place really to go to be in radio. But I was assigned to the quartermaster's office, S4 section of the battalion, and so I rearranged paper clips. But I was able, because I knew what the forms to fill out, to get myself on a levy to Hawaii, to the 14th Radio Broadcasting and Leaflet Battalion. And that happened after about 3 months at being in Fort Bragg. But while I was there, you remember, of course, the program Monitor.
Oh, very well.
On NBC.
Very well.
Sort of the predecessor of All Things Considered on NPR. It started at 6 o'clock on Friday night and ran until midnight on Sunday on NBC. It was one of the sort of the last gasps of network radio to try and fight television. And Bob and Ray were on it, and I forget who else, but it was sort of a segmented program. They would have a half hour of features, and they'd do something else, and then they'd do something else. They ran a contest for the most beautiful voice in America. And I was working for 2 radio stations in Honolulu at that time. The job at the 14th Radio Broadcasting was a day job, an office job.
Good evening. Happy to be with you again. At the risk of being obvious, I'll make the observation that another year is winding up its business. And I'm exhausted. This year has literally worn me out. I only hope that 1957 will mean a little relaxation. Oh well, you're not here to listen to my idle thoughts. I offer them only as rationalizations for a somewhat lackadaisical attitude enveloping me at this moment. Thus you can be assured that my conversation will be on the minimum side tonight. Let's listen to some Beethoven.
And in the evening, 5 of us had an apartment down on Waikiki Beach. I defended liberty from Waikiki Beach. My roommates would play bridge. They were rabid bridge players. I would go off to work at the radio station. They announced this contest on NBC over KGU, which was the NBC station in Honolulu, and everybody said, "You ought to enter this contest." I said, no, it wouldn't be ethical. I work for another radio station. Then I learned that the lead news anchor on KGU had entered his own contest.
Oh.
So I said, well, if he's going to do it, I'm going to do it. And much to KGU's chagrin, I won their contest. And for that, I got a trip to Las Vegas. Anyway, then there was a couple levels up, and I ended up as one of 12 finalists. Number 2. First place was a girl from Los Angeles, so I could say most beautiful male voice.
You got it.
And
anyway.
At that point, I had intended to stay in Honolulu and work for the radio station after I got out of the Army, because I enjoyed being in Hawaii immensely. It was a great place to be. But I decided, gee, I've won NBC's contest. They're going to hire me. So I'm going to go back to the States. So I went back to work for WFMT and waited for NBC to hire me, which they never did. But I continued to work at WFMT up until 1960, when I was hired to be a new program director for a new FM station in Detroit.
And what's the name of that station?
WDTM. And Jean and I, my wife, meantime I'd gotten married. To
Did you
Jean.
meet Jean in Chicago?
Yes, that's an interesting story too, because Ray Nordstrand, who I mentioned, was working at WFMT, and I was working at FMT, and Jean at that time was a welfare worker in the Chicago Welfare Department, Cook County Welfare Department. And Ray Nordstrand's girlfriend was also working with Jean, and Ray Nordstrand's girlfriend didn't like the girl that I was dating at that time, so she set up a blind date with Jean. And we got married. And so anyway, we moved to Detroit and put on this brand new radio station, where I was program director. And about 2 years later, let's see, it would have been in the summer of 1960. I got a call out of the blue from a guy in Cleveland whose name was C.K. Patrick, who said that he was in the process of bidding on a radio station that had just gone on the air, as a matter of fact, the previous April. And the station was up for sale, and he had been in the advertising business, and he knew some people in the advertising business in Detroit, and had called them and said, is there anybody in Detroit who knows programming that might be interested in coming to Cleveland? And a couple of people suggested that he call me. And I said, well, yeah, I'm interested. One of the things I want to do in my career is to be in station ownership. And so I went down and looked at the radio station. His call letters were WDGO, standing for Douglas G. Oviatt, who was a real estate entrepreneur on the east side of town, and he built a lot of homes out on County Line Road. And they had decided that they didn't want to be in the radio business after 6 or 7 months. And so we were negotiating. And in October, Dick Jansen, who at that time was the sales manager for WHK, which was the #1 station in Cleveland at that time, and Mark Weiss, who owned Weiss Advertising, one of the biggest advertising agencies in town, the ones that came up with a name like Schmucker, it's got to be good. They bought 75% of WDGO. So Pat and I went our separate ways because they had sold the station to other people. In January or February of '61, I got a call from Dick Jansen, who eventually became the head of Scripps Howard Broadcasting. And he said, well, we've decided we're not going to make $1 million the first year with this radio station, and we've either got to put a lot more money into it, but we understand that we know that you and Patrick were negotiating to buy it. Would you like to buy it from us? So I got hold of Pat, and yes, he was interested. So we went out and importuned friends and family for loans, and cashed in some insurance policies and raised $20,000 to put down on the station. And I think we had another $10,000 for capital. We bought the station for $70,000 and debt. There were houses that were more expensive than WDGO at that time.
Where were the studios?
The studios were in a building, the second floor of a building in Eastgate Shopping Center, which is now where the Target store is. And the tower was there, and there were some dentists on the first floor, and we were on the second floor. And we took over on November 1st, 1962. Changed the call letters from WDGO. We wanted Cleveland identification, and we decided that what we really needed was WCLE. CLE is the airline designation for Cleveland, but that's in Cleveland, Tennessee. Oh. So then we wanted WCLD, but that's in Cleveland, Mississippi. And finally we got down to WCLV. And there are people who still don't understand that it means Cleveland.
What was the programming like at that time?
Well, it was classical. most FM stations, or many FM stations, had played classical music. The one exception was WDOK FM, which was what we call beautiful music. But yeah, it was mostly classical music when we took over, and we made it even more so when. Because I was bound and determined that, and Pat agreed with me that we were going to make it as a classical music station. Mm-hmm. And you know, in the 50 years, 2012, the station will be 50 years old, we are the only commercial radio station in Cleveland that hasn't changed its call letters or its format in that period of time.
In 50 years.
In 50 years, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Were you the program director at the beginning?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was program director up until in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Vice president and program director.
And was there any live programming then?
Well, over the years, obviously we started doing the Cleveland Orchestra broadcast in 1965. We did tapings of concerts. It was mostly delayed broadcasts rather than actually live broadcasts, although we did a couple, as I recall. But we recorded the Cleveland Chamber Music Society concerts, and we did programs from Oberlin and Kent State, Cleveland State University. We did some programs, which we still do, as a matter of fact. The really big emphasis on live programming started, in 2006, when we started doing live broadcasts of the Cleveland Orchestra on Saturday nights. And we were doing some live broadcasts from Oberlin and some live broadcasts from Cleveland State and from Baldwin Wallace, and we continue to do those.
And the Wurlitzer Hour was live.
And of course, in what year did we start?
2001. That must have been a very early live
Yes, it was.
show.
Yeah.
Has the programming changed on WCLV at all over the years?
Well, we started out really as a duplicate of WFMT, which called itself a fine arts station, and we called ourselves Cleveland's Fine Arts Station. We had an hour of poetry on Saturday afternoon, of all things, and we did some other talk shows and so forth. So it was, we did a full-length drama every week.
Really?
Most recorded dramas. And eventually, we heard the audience say, "Shut up and play the music." And we began to phase out all of the talk shows.
Well, you certainly have a love for classical music. And
well, when I was a teenager, I collected classical music recordings as well as popular music of the day, Les Brown and Tommy Dorsey and Benny Goodman. But one of the first classical albums I bought was the Plow That Broke the Plains, which is a suite for a documentary that Virgil Thompson wrote. Then I got when LPs came in, because LPs came in about 1948, I got the Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 6 and the Sibelius Symphony No. 7, which is an odd thing, Gershwin Piano Concerto, and so forth. I had a really decent record collection while I was in high school.
What's the story of weekend radio, and how did that all happen?
Back in WFMT, Mike Nichols had a program called The Midnight Special. And this was different than anything else on FMT, which was basically classical music. But on Saturday night at 10 o'clock until midnight, they played folk music and comedy records and some Broadway and odds and ends. That program is still on the air on WFMT. When I went to WDTM in Detroit, I decided I was going to have a Saturday night program like the Midnight Special. It was called WDTM Saturday Night, and it was folk music and comedy and Broadway, and it was pretty popular. When I came to Cleveland, I decided we were going to do the same show, and so and I came to work for WDGO before it was transferred, because when it was announced that C.K. Patrick and Robert Conrad had bought WDGO, the staff left.
Why?
Well, I don't know why. Well, they knew new owners were going to come in and maybe shake up the station. So I said to the Oviets, who owned who were running the station, "I'll come down and work for you." So I came down, and me and one other person were the announcing staff on WDGO from July until November when we took over. Well, on WDGO, I started WDGO Saturday night.
So that goes back in radio 40-some years.
Well, it was 1962.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost 50 years.
Yes.
So, and this was, it was from 10 o'clock to midnight, and again, it was folk music and comedy records and some Broadway and so forth. And that show was on the air up until 1989, until my wife convinced me there was something else to do on Saturday night besides go to the radio station. Mm-hmm. Well, in 1982, we decided that maybe a version of the Saturday night show would make a good syndicated program. So we created weekend radio, which was essentially a 1 hour distillation of the 3 hour WCLV Saturday night, some of the same material. And we got maybe 100 radio stations to carry weekend radio. Didn't carry it in Cleveland because it was, again, the same material. Finally, I said, here I am doing the work twice. Why don't I just take 1 hour out of WCLV Saturday night and play weekend radio in that hour? And then in 1989, when, again, my wife convinced me that I should be home on Saturday night.
Is there anything that, looking back on your years in radio, you would have done differently?
Offhand, well, I mean, I'm sure there were incidents along the way that, but nothing major. You know, it's very interesting how your life goes, because I accepted the job in Detroit, being very comfortable and loving working at WFMT, and they really wanted to keep me. They kept giving me offers to, to stay. I said, no, I want to be out on my own, and I want to eventually get involved in ownership and so forth. And then I went to DTM, and I was in Detroit, and C.K. Patrick found me in Detroit, and I came to Cleveland, and it just worked out. And I've been so fortunate that my entire career I've been doing exactly what I want to do, and there are very few people who get a chance to do that.
That's so true.
Well, I've been very lucky to be able to do exactly what I want to do, and life has worked out in circumstances. What would have been if I'd stayed in Hawaii? Yeah, I might still be there on the beach.
The beach